Hello, everyone. At a time when the UN General Assembly meets and discusses critical issues like climate change and COVID-19 scenario, I have two interesting guests with me today. Michael Sheldrick, the co-founder of Global Citizen, and Aaditya Thackeray, who's the Maharashtra Minister for Environment. Thank you, both of you, for speaking to CNN News 18 and welcome here. Let me first come to you, Michael. There's a lot of excitement about Global Citizen Live, which is going to happen across 6 continents. Please tell us the highlights of it.
Yeah, well, Global Citizen Live is a once-in-a-generation 24-hour worldwide event taking place this weekend with festivals and performances across 6 continents around the world. Anyone can tune in wherever they are on YouTube, on Twitter. We're going to be starting in Mumbai, traveling from Mumbai to Lagos, to Paris, to Rio, New York City, London, Seoul, Los Angeles, Sydney, and much, much more. And it will be broadcast across the Z network locally starting at 10:30 p.m. India time on Saturday, the 25th. And for us, this is not a moment of celebration. It's a global moment of unity to defend the planet and defeat poverty. Right now, people are frustrated around the world. We've got these twin crises of climate change, vaccine inequity, and the fact that 41 million people are on the brink of starvation around the world. We need to step up and we need to demand better from our leaders. And so this weekend, we'll be sending a powerful message to step up, to deliver the billions of doses needed in the world by the end of the year, to deliver on the promises we made around climate justice. And thrilled to have the minister on here who's going to be making some exciting announcements himself. And finally, to deliver and ensure that everyone has at least a meal at the end of the day. No one should go hungry in a world with a plenty. No one should go hungry when we've got billionaires literally blasting off into space right now. And we're joined by some of the most amazing artists, and really thrilled that in India, we've got everyone from Badshah, Amit Trivedi, Anil Kapoor, and Dia Mirza joining together with the likes of Coldplay, Ed Sheeran, Billie Eilish, and Elton John around the world. So I hope everyone can tune in, but really it's about sending a very serious message to the G20 and to our leaders who need to hear this right now.
You know, India is going to be a part of it after almost 5 years. The last time India was a part of it was in 2016. So tell us more about, how is it that you look at India's role, and how is the whole event that is going to happen on 25th here from the gateway going to be?
Yeah, well, India's extremely important. Besides the fact it represents one slice of humanity, it's also a member of the G20. And right now, we've seen around the world, we've seen the signs of climate change. We've seen fires, we've seen hurricanes, we've seen floods, we've seen droughts. This is code red crisis right now. And there was a report that came out at the end of last week that told us that even with all the action already being taken, at the moment, we're on track to see temperature rises of 2.7 degrees above pre-industrial levels. And for vulnerable people, including people in India, that will be devastating if this happens. And so we need the G20, all countries, to buckle down. We need them to commit to halve emissions at the very least by 2030, and we need them to all commit to net zero by 2050. And I hear the call. I know on Friday, as part of the huge Fridays for Future protest around the world, there will be many activists in India who will be raising their voices, calling for us to keep temperatures rises below 1.5 degrees, ensuring climate justice and equity, listening to the best united science currently available, creating a safe pathway for all. That's what's needed right now. And again, I'm thrilled the minister is joining us, because we know it's not just national governments that need to step up. It's also cities and businesses as well. Businesses account for a huge amount of emissions. And so we're asking businesses and cities to also commit to these targets, to sign on to the race to zero, commit to significantly reducing your emissions by 2030, lay out a pathway to getting us to net zero, and commit to climate justice. And I know with the minister, we've got some exciting announcements tomorrow, which I hope will send a powerful message to the G20 that the time for action is now. We've got just over 5 weeks to the G20 summit, 5 weeks to the COP26 negotiations in Glasgow, the UK. And I don't think this is hyperbole when I say that the world is looking to our leaders to deliver now, because the action taken now will determine whether or not we avoid catastrophic climate change, and that will affect the people of India and much of the world.
Well, Aditya Thackeray, if I may bring you in at this moment, extremely critical topics being talked about there, particularly climate change, which is extremely close to your heart. How important do you think is the fact that Mumbai from Maharashtra, which is the financial capital of the country, is going to be a part of global citizen life, is going to be a part of it after almost 5 years? How do you look at this?
Thank you for having me on this. And for us, it's obviously a very proud moment because Mumbai is leading the change. We're a financial capital of the country. We're also a crucial state as Maharashtra in India, with a population of almost 120 million people and an urban population of almost 65 million people. I think it is up to us to lead the change. Change is coming both ways, top bottom and bottom top, because we need citizens to be, imbibing climate change adaptation measures and mitigation measures. It's not just movements or protest activities, but as habits in our daily life. I think that is very, very crucial. On the other hand, of course, in terms of policy changes, like Michael said, it's extremely crucial for all of us as governments at every possible level, be it national, subnational, city, urban, rural, to be involved in climate change mitigation and adaptations measures at every single moment of today. It's been widely read, it's been widely felt and seen across the world in terms of the hurricanes, cyclones, storms, the droughts and famines that we're facing everywhere, that we do not have the luxury of time in terms of climate change action. If action has to begin for the survival of all of us, and I'm not painting a doomsday scenario, but every small disaster on a global scale, and I call it small because, a disaster is big for every person who faces it. It is big for every small town or city that faces it. But for a person sitting in another part of the world, it may be small news, but it is going to hit that person at some point in the very near future. So we do not have the luxury of time. It is very crucial that we act. And for us to be hosting Global Citizen, it is only a way to tell the world that we are together in this and there is no boundary today. Climate change is going to hit us hard around the world, irrespective of our socioeconomic status, a political system that runs our country or our state or our city. It's time we, pull up our socks and work together for our planet. I think that is very crucial.
Apart from climate change, an important aspect of Global Citizen is clearly vaccine equity, as you've been putting out, Michael. One of the key objectives that we've seen about vaccine equity, but there are several hurdles to it as well. And just today, the UK has said that it will not recognize Cohen's certificate, which is being looked at in some sense as vaccine racism in India. How do you look at it?
Well, I think what we're seeing is the same inequity that we've seen the last 18 months play out, right? We've already seen this on dose sharing, where we heard the G7 months ago say that they were going to step up, donate doses around the world. And then so far, we've seen some commitments, and I note the US commitment today, but far lacking and far too little too late of what is actually needed to end the pandemic. Also on intellectual property, as the pandemic scaled up, it became evident that we just needed to produce more vaccines. And India and South Africa put a proposal on the table that would allow countries to do that. And it was blocked by many countries, including the UK. And I think in that case, the UK spoke about quality concerns. And our view is, look, if it's good enough for AstraZeneca to be licensed to the Serum Institute, and then for those vaccines to be exported around the world via COVAX, they should be good for everyone. They're WHO approved at the end of the day. But ultimately, this is indicative of what we've seen through this pandemic. The pandemic has really shown that we still live in a two-tiered world where the strong prosper and the weak suffer. And you see it on climate change as well. Why are countries upset? Because developed countries said we would deliver $100 billion a year annually to help vulnerable people confront climate change. And we're still not there. Even with President Biden's commitment yesterday to double climate financing, we still have a $15 billion gap that the G20 need to figure out a way of filling over the next 5 weeks. It's just not just and fair to expect developing countries to step up without that reciprocal treatment from developed countries. And one thing I would say, going back to Mumbai, when we were there 5 years ago, Mumbai was an amazing city. I was thrilled to spend so much time there, but I saw the passion and energy of young people stepping up, taking action. I saw 100,000 people come out to see Global Citizen Festival India, and it's that same passion. We still have hope. We can turn the tide, but the power has to be in young people's hands around the world if we're to get leaders to respond. Because one thing we're seeing, without that passion and energy from the youth holding leaders accountable, we're not going to get the decisions we need from our leaders.
You're saying we'll not get the decisions that we need from our leaders, but at the same time, Aaditya Thackeray, if I may ask you, this kind of vaccine inequity that Michael also highlighted right now, does that in some sense generate an outrage? Do you think that this is vaccine racism by the UK?
Call it vaccine inequity, call it vaccine racism. I think what is happening is everyone's just bewildered by what is the next process that we ought to follow. Because we're looking at different predictions around the world, the vaccine breaches, the vaccine usage, in terms of the third wave and the fourth wave. I think everyone is still grappling with our own issues. However, having said that, it is very oddly strange that a vaccine produced in India with the same license as from the UK is not recognized, or the app is not recognized. I think we ought to come together, be with the G7, be with the G20 or the United Nations right now, and have a common vaccine identification around the world. I think if that could help, because primarily vaccines given anywhere in the world are going to be qualitatively the same. We have doctors who do not see any boundaries or races or any borders administering the vaccines. We have got multiple healthcare workers and frontline workers who are going beyond means and beyond any hurdles to actually go out, reach out and give the vaccine. Such type of inequity or creating more hurdles is not going to help the cause of global vaccination. And I've come to believe that till each and every citizen around the world is vaccinated, none of us are safe, because the virus is going to keep mutating. Now that is for science to handle, but for all of us as administrators or citizens, I think we ought to have some common recognition to all the vaccines that are produced around the world and obviously licensed around the world in terms of allowing it into each other's countries. Otherwise, what is the incentive to go for vaccination? And if vaccine racism continues, there's going to be obviously a discord amongst the world and in countries around the world. So I think we ought to look at that very seriously. I believe the Prime Minister of India is also in the United States today. There should be some positive news coming in from there.
Well, yes, you're talking of a collective decision, but we're talking of something that is being looked at as an arbitrary step, which has been taken by the UK government. Do you think that, considering the wider sentiment, considering this is what the Ministry of External Affairs is also likely to be thinking, that the principle of reciprocity should also be applied by India in this case?
I think there are tons of bilateral relations that will be obviously impacted in terms of trade, in terms of, the other bilateral relations, the COP26 coming up, almost everything that is dependent on bilateral relationship between countries. I hope that remains steady and the vaccine issue really goes out, because obviously with, sorting of relationships, it's not going to take us any further. We need to strengthen our relationships, starting with vaccine equity and of course, everything else together. So it is a matter of concern for India, of course, and, billions of people in India about how Indian, vaccination certificates are treated around the world.
As a young minister from India yourself, do you condemn this move of the UK government?
I think before any judgment, and obviously it is, like I said, strange and odd and, something that cannot be justified. Let us wait for our External Affairs Ministry and, the government of UK to speak and sort out issues, because going into a rapid judgment is not going to help. Let's look at a solution. And that is what we're here for.
Mike, coming back to you, we have been talking about vaccine equity. On one hand, we've seen that the developed world has possibly a stockpile of vaccines while the not so privileged countries are still waiting for vaccines to be there. Now, whether it's climate change, whether it is pandemic like COVID, nobody is safe till everybody is safe, because neither the virus nor does climate change recognize any borders. At such a time, at a time when the UN General Assembly meets, at a time when the Indian Prime Minister himself is in the US for crucial meetings, what will be your expectations out of global leaders?
Well, look, it's only been this week, really, and President Biden, to his credit, in the summit he's convening today, will lay this out. But it's taken us this long to even get to the point where there's a roadmap to achieving 70% global immunization, which is needed according to the WHO if we're to end this pandemic for everyone. We've seen, as you've pointed out, with resurgent variants around the world, that the idea that you can end the pandemic in one country and wall yourself off just isn't realistic, not morally, not from a global health standpoint, also economically as well, if you want to open borders and resume trade. So we need to open this up for everyone to debate. We need our leaders to come to the table. And one thing I would say is, it's great we've got this plan to commit to get into 70% global vaccine coverage by this time next year, when leaders come back to New York for the UN General Assembly. Our view is actually the world, if it had the will, it's certainly got the resources, it could do this much, much faster and much earlier. But we need to start taking action now. And two things that the world could do urgently. Firstly, you mentioned the stockpiling of vaccines. Airfinity, a research analysis group, has calculated, even when you take into account the possible need for booster shots, the G7 and the EU still have 1.7 billion vaccines stockpiled that could be redistributed to low-income countries by the end of the year. Secondly, we obviously in India as a major vaccine producer. In Africa, they've recently launched this mRNA vaccine hub that could be supported by the likes of Pfizer and Moderna if they were to collaborate, and we're still not seeing that collaboration. So I think it comes to a point where the G20, where governments need to step up and even force extraordinary collaboration if they need to, because we're not seeing that from some sectors in the pharmaceutical industry. So these are the measures we need to see today. Ultimately, vaccine dose sharing and donations is one way to go about it. It's not the medium to long-term way we're going to end this pandemic. We need the ability for countries around the world, developing countries and others, to be able to have what they need to produce their own vaccines within their own regions if we're to end this for everyone. So I'm glad it's happening. Again, it's come a little bit too late. Kudos to President Biden for stepping up. I hope the European Union also step up and accelerate their dose sharing. But the time for now is to rally behind that goal, 70%, fine to commit to it this time next year. And if we can, we should do it earlier. The world is dependent on those leaders today.
Aaditya Thackeray, do you think this is the time for India to allow booster doses, at least for its frontline workers now?
Look, that is a call the doctors have to make and the task force has to make, because at least as for the state of Maharashtra, every decision that is made on the medical side of COVID, and obviously in terms of any measured lockdown or opening up, is always taken with a scientific mind and with the doctors' task force. So I believe it's completely up to the doctors and the experts who've read much into COVID to take that call. And obviously we will be following what the doctors say, because finally it is a medical emergency. And in times like this, it is always good to listen to the doctors and the experts.
Is there any consultation going on with the COVID task force in Maharashtra for the same?
COVID task force,
6 months since the healthcare workers have received both their doses.
Yes, the COVID task force meets every week, and there is obviously consultations on almost everything, including the coverage of the first dose, the second dose, if at all there's a booster dose needed, in terms of the treatment protocols, because like you see, each week, things are constantly updated and consensus is built on it. So even though there will be discussions, I think we need to have a little more, consultations. And that is, like I said, completely up to the COVID task force, which is made up of doctors, to debate, discuss, and put it out.
Has the government asked for any such opinion, and is there a time frame by when it is expected that some call will be taken on this?
The government constantly consults each week, like I said, but we're not pressurizing or creating bias in the minds of the task force, because if we keep asking, there would be some pressure from one place or the other. So obviously we give them inputs in terms of the feedback that comes from the ground, comes from the grassroots, be it our municipal commissioners, CEOs, district collectors from the entire revenue administration system. But the questions are put up, the inputs are given. But of course, it is, like I said, without any pressure, only for science to decide. And I think that is very crucial for us.
Also, Aaditya Thackeray, India has administered 83 crore doses of vaccines to its population. How do you see India's fight against COVID with respect to the large number of people we have, with respect to the initial glitches that were there? How do you see this?
I can speak for Maharashtra, and since day one, we've accepted that COVID is a pandemic. It's not something that you can hold great pride in saying, "Oh, I have less numbers," because that's not the fact. The numbers will be there. COVID cases will rise and go down as the cyclic events as we see in the first wave or the second wave. Of course, we need to work on a couple of measures. One is keeping the numbers absolutely transparent and being accountable to the people, because you need to know what is happening. The citizens need to know what is happening, what the numbers are. And even they know that the numbers are not going to be less, because it is a pandemic. Everyone around the world is facing the same situation. All governments, however much highly equipped we were, obviously everyone fell short in reading and understanding COVID. And as science expands on what COVID is, we're trying to adhere to what COVID protocols could be. In terms of, again, what we are building the transparent database for and COVID protocols for is, God forbid, 5 years down the line, 50 years down the line, 100 years down the line, if at all there is another pandemic, the people and the administrators down the line in the future should have reference points to how states responded to COVID and what the real numbers and data was, because that is key to understanding. As today, we don't have much of a clue of what happened back then 100 years ago with the Spanish flu. So treatment protocols, behavioral protocols, corporate protocols, medical protocols, I think all of these should be documented in a transparent, accountable manner and kept in databases across the world. So I think that is very, very crucial for us. Going beyond that, even today, each day we're looking at increasing our medical treatment, our facilities, our hospitals, our jumbo COVID care centers. Can we do better each day? And can we keep the cases in control? Is what we're looking at. Testing is at the highest ever in Maharashtra. Vaccination of the second dose has been the highest in the country in Maharashtra. The coverage of vaccines, and we are having different days for vaccination also sometimes. Vaccination for specially abled people, vaccination for women, because that was one of the genders that we thought was lagging behind in terms of vaccination. So the other day we had vaccination only open for women, vaccination for 18 to 44, for the working class, for the students. I think all of these things are really important for us in terms of vaccine coverage. So that is equity and equality in terms of the vaccination drives. We're also working with corporates and manufacturing industries so as to see if there is a third wave, God forbid, we do not have to shut down our manufacturing industries or corporates, and we can work in pods or isolations or silos and only quarantine those people where a COVID positive case is found. So the response going further has to be much, much more measured, and in terms of medical protocols, much more scientific. And that's what we're constantly working on.
As a minister who's associated now with Global Citizen, what is your commitment to the cause?
I think what Global Citizen really encompasses, right from climate change to healthcare, on each of it, we have certain commitments to make, and commitments not in the long term, because long term, as I see, is no term for climate change efforts or healthcare efforts today. For us, it is everything that we have to do today, promise today and deliver today. That is what we're looking at. And things like 43 cities in race to zero, greenhouse gas inventories for 43 cities that have almost a population of 65 million people, almost equal to that of France. And going much beyond that, where city of Mumbai, where Global Citizen is happening. In the next 2 years, we're almost going for 2,100 fully electric buses, which are emission-free and sound-free. I think these are some of the things: protection of 9,800 mangroves in the state of Maharashtra, 10 conservation reserves, marine sanctuaries. These are some of the things we're looking at. And of course, for our cities to be leading the climate change battle. So I think it is a large canvas. for all of us in every capacity, at every level, irrespective of socioeconomic background, to contribute in our own way. And that's what we're looking at in terms of partnering with Global Citizen and taking our voice global, as well as learning from our partners in the Global Citizen movement around the world. So we seek to learn as well.
Mumbai, as an international city, as the financial capital of the country, has seen the worst of it because of climate change in the recent 1.5 years or so. We have seen cyclones that we had never seen in the past. Maharashtra has witnessed catastrophic landslides as well. How do you see this impact, and how urgent is the need for taking steps to mitigate the impact of climate change?
Like I said, let me not paint you a doomsday scenario, but we do not have the luxury of 10 years, as we call it, the last decade. For us, it is very, very important that Mumbai and other cities across Maharashtra and other states across India, because the global south is something where we need to lead this climate change battle. For us, it is very crucial that we do it in time. We started with the Mumbai Clean Air Climate Action Program, and we're looking at each citizen to give us feedback in terms of all the 5 elements of nature, be it air, water, earth, and solid waste management and energy, and bringing every aspect, 360-degree perspective of a better lifestyle. Because when we look at climate change, it's not just something that is remote from us at the poles anymore. It's not in the Himalayas, in the retreating glaciers of Alps. It's about what's happening in our backyards, in our farms, in our own homes and our lanes. If we have to act on it, it is today, and that's what we're working on.
Michael, let me ask you one question. We have been vaccinating people at a very fast rate. Till now, India has administered 83 crore doses. How do you look at India's fight against COVID?
Look, I think I see India as playing a very important role. Very early on, AstraZeneca licensed its doses to the Serum Institute, and those doses were distributed to COVAX and around the world. And what was key at the time, and I remember speaking with Adar Poonawalla at the time, is he gave those doses at not-for-profit prices. And to be frank, that was $4 to $5 that he sold to poorer, lower, to COVAX, which had distributed them to low-income countries around the world. They were, let's be candid, they were the only ones who were selling it at such a low cost. Others were selling it much higher around the world. And he was saying you need other pharmaceuticals to also sell it at discounted or not-for-profit rates, which many of them refused to do until immense pressure was brought to bear on them. Of course, when the huge wave happened over the March-April period, we saw just the impact of that. The fact that low-income countries were reliant on what was produced in India, because as soon as they had to be recirculated to address, understandably, the huge outbreak in India, low-income countries were left without anything. And it's not right that low-income countries, India alone, should have to shoulder that burden. And it's, again, to the world's deep shame that we haven't done more to address equity. Where was the support for India and South Africa's proposal to waive intellectual property rights that would have allowed countries to produce, or regions around the world to produce vaccines themselves? Where is the support for dose sharing at an extraordinary level? And I know the news yesterday that India will now begin to resume its exports to COVAX, but it speaks volumes that COVAX was left in that situation because it was put at the back of the queue globally by most of the vaccine manufacturers. And as a result, low-income countries around the world were left without vaccines. Again, too little, too late. And so I hope moving forward, again, from today's vaccine summit President Biden is hosting here in the United States, we see an upsurge of support. Doses now, we need at least 1 billion immediately, ideally 2 billion by the end of the year to low-income countries. We need support so all regions can distribute and manufacture and distribute to their own populations. And finally, to the point, we need to ensure we're never in this situation again where vaccines are produced and hoarded by one section of the global community. We had this situation where 80% of the world's vaccines were administered in high-income countries, and low-income countries administered less than 1% of all vaccines. That is horrendous. Some people have referred to it as vaccine apartheid. Again, call it what you will. The facts speak for itself. So this is something we need to step up. We need India's voice to step up. We need India to set an example. I'm glad those exports are resuming to COVAX because that's important for much of the world. And we need the G20 to finally commit to end the pandemic for everyone.
One last question, and this is again for you, Michael. You've spoken about the usage of the developed countries giving $100 billion for mitigation of climate change. The underdeveloped countries, even now when we see the carbon footprint of the developed countries continues to be a lot more than that of the developing countries. Do you still see that there is some discrepancy? How do you think these $100 billion will help if the developed countries themselves do not reduce their carbon footprint?
Well, you're absolutely right in terms of many of the developed countries, in terms of reducing their own emissions, they still need to step up. My own home country of Australia, still as yet refuses to commit to net zero by 2050. The closest they've gone is to say, we will as soon as possible reduce or achieve net neutrality, preferably by 2050, right? We need more. And what they've committed to reduce by 2030 is far below what is required if we're to avoid catastrophic climate change. And Australia accounts per capita as one of the largest carbon emitters in the world. So we need to, as a whole, we all need to collectively reduce our emissions by half by 2030 at the least, get to net zero by 2050. On the climate pledge you mentioned, the $100 billion promise that was meant to be met last year, that had been promised several times to help vulnerable countries respond to climate change. The reality is even after President Biden's pledge yesterday, we're $15 billion at least short. My belief is if we're expecting countries, developing countries, to come with pledges to address their own emissions and to commit to reduce their own emissions, we need to also deliver on the promises we've made. And that is that we need to find that 100 billion. I think if we can do that in the next 5 weeks, Alok Sharma, the COP president, I'm thrilled he's coming to Global Citizen Live. And I know one of his messages will be, come on G20, come on developed countries. We've got 5 weeks. We can do this. $15 billion is a lot less than the hundreds of billions that the US spends on defense each year. This is something we can do. It will send a powerful message. I think will restore some degree of trust that has been eroded through this pandemic and get us back on track to addressing catastrophic climate change. And I should note that the US, even after their pledge yesterday, they're probably on par with what Spain and Italy gives, but they're nowhere near, say, what the Nordics give. Norway, Sweden, these two countries with very small populations give a lot more. France, which is 8 times smaller than the American economy, gives much more in terms of its fair share towards the climate finance and pledge. So this is something we need all to step up. It's a message we're going to put out there very loud and clear. Let's get to the 100 billion over the next 5 days. We're in a race against time, and let's come together and put the commitments in now if we're to avoid catastrophic climate change and defend the planet and defeat poverty.
How will these commitments help India fight climate change, you think, Aaditya?
Well, I think as the minister said, you take Mumbai, which is seeing rise in sea levels. You take the fact that India itself, it's a huge, diverse country, but you've got issues of drought. You've got issues of, hurricanes, extreme weather events. Like the reality is, and I think the minister said it well, no one is isolated from climate change. Unlike the pandemic, where some countries thought that they could wall themselves off as an island and stay out the pandemic, vaccinate their own citizens, you can't do that with climate change. No one is an island entire of itself in that respect. This is going to impact all of us, which is why it's incumbent on all of us to act now. But of course, those who are always hurt the hardest are the most vulnerable. They are the ones who are left behind. It's farmers, it's women and girls, it's those next to low-lying sea areas. It's those who our society tends to marginalize and leave behind. Those are the ones who will be hit first and hardest by climate change unless we act now.
Aaditya Thackeray, if these kind of commitments do come from the international community, as Michael has been talking about, how do you think it will help the country's marginalized populations, particularly in this fight in climate change?
I think there are two aspects to it. There are, of course, financial commitments that are being made across the world by developed countries and also rapidly developing countries. It is crucial for those commitments to be made and delivered, because obviously moving towards carbon neutrality will take us, in terms of a load on our financing, in terms of moving away from the conventional methods to renewable sources and non-conventional, sources, be it energy, be it transport, be it innovation. There's tons of things to happen. And the other, of course, is in terms of climate action, what we do to reduce our carbon footprint, what we do to move away from our conventional methods of life and move towards better methods of life for our planet. I think both the commitments are very crucial, and more than commitments, following up on those commitments is really, really crucial. What it will build together is a sense of global unity, because today we believe that it is only the responsibility of a few select countries around the world to be participating in climate change mitigation and action. And like Michael said, like we all agree that, it's no longer that, one country is going to be left out or isolated from climate impact. It's going to be all around the world. Maybe the things that impact us are going to be different. Maybe hailstorm somewhere, maybe cyclone somewhere, maybe colder climates, maybe warmer weather somewhere. It's going to be different, but it's surely not going to remain the same and not going to remain mild. Every country is going to be hit and hit hard. Every country has their own set of vulnerable population, be it in terms of gender, be it in terms of economics, be it in terms of age groups. All of us are going to be taking, I wouldn't call it the load, because of course it is the duty for all of us to be helping and supporting one another, but we're going to take the load for everyone. And I think walking shoulder to shoulder, walking together, and strongly accepting the fact that climate change is here, we are in times of emergency, we need to act and act soon, act unanimously and act together with the same intent, with the same commitment and contribution is what is going to matter.
One last question for you. You talk of a state, the state that you represent is itself one of the worst hit due to climate change. You stay in a city, we stay in a city which has bore the brunt of it. With the kind of infrastructure projects that have been coming up, is your government thinking of climate change resilient infrastructure development?
Absolutely, because development and climate change action can go hand in hand. Things like if you don't have a good cooking system in your own house, you're going to be getting firewood and burning that and creating more carbon fuel. If you don't have electric mobility or better infrastructure for charging points, you're going to still be burning fossil fuel. So obviously we do need development, and without development you're going nowhere. But when we talk about development, to add the word sustainable to it, and every time possible and every time necessary, is very crucial, and to act on it. I think that is very important. Getting infrastructural projects to pass the climate test, mitigation measures, adaptation measures, moving further in terms of how this will pan out in terms of climate and time, I think is very, very crucial. Maharashtra has been hit the hardest in terms of the last few years, the last decade. Only in the last 1 year have we contributed almost 14,500 crore rupees. That is almost $2 billion in terms of compensation for events arising out of climate change events. I think these are some of the things that we need to look at, and look at mitigation measures, adaptation measures, and move towards rapidly.
On this note, and on the note of hope that more and more leaders will commit to mitigate the impact of climate change, I would like to thank both of you for speaking to CNN News 18. It was a pleasure to have you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.